Welcome back to The Lone Conservative. Today, I've got an awesome guest on for you today. I think the first person from the other place where the podcast is streamed that I've had on here. His name's Orty Packard, and he's the co-host of the KLRN show FUBAR. Orty, thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is great. I'm really the first guest you've had from KLRN.
Yeah, I was originally going to have Fu on, but then I rescheduled like I did with you at one point. So.
All right. Yeah, no, great. I'm glad to be your first.
So that sounded weird, Orty. Don't say it like that. Okay. But what I wanted to talk to you about today is I know that it may be old news by the time this comes out on Monday because the news cycle just moves so fast now. The media moves from one topic to the next, to the next, to the next, just like our president. But I think it's worthwhile going over, and we've gone over it on the podcast before, but it's mainly been a solo episode topic, and you're a smart guy. I feel like you could bring some nuance to this whole thing, and that is there's been this wave of new abortion bills being passed in places like Ohio and places like Alabama and places like Georgia, and now Missouri is passing. I just saw this, it popped up on my feed. They're passing a new bill which would ban all abortions past 8 weeks of gestation. So all of these conservative states, and I guess even some swing states like Ohio is technically a swing state, are starting to adopt these really strict abortion laws. And I what do you make of it?
Well, first of all, I want to comment. Yeah, you're totally right on how quick the media moves now. We joke about it on FUBAR on how we used to, pick the topics of the week to focus on. Now it's the topics of the day, sometimes the half day, to where by the time we're getting to it on live, half of the stuff we want to talk about is old news. But you're talking about these bills. This is a reaction to New York and Virginia passing such open abortion bills. It's right up to the point of birth almost. So when you have these states like Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, Ohio going the opposite direction, which really I think all of this is doing is they're both power plays to get Roe revisited.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, it's like Alabama with their abortion bill. It was really kind of a moot point because there's only 3 abortion clinics in the entire state of Alabama. So it's not like, it's not like it's a huge problem in Alabama, and their peak was 20. So, that's really not, it shouldn't have been a big enough issue for it to become part of Alabama law. But it is a signal saying we as a conservative state or as a right-leaning state, we want to revisit Roe. And that's what I think. The state legislatures are just creating battle lines. They're taking the pendulum swing to the farthest directions possible to get back in the middle to where maybe the nation can make a national law on it saying, okay, this is where we as a country believe life begins. Because you look at a lot of the European countries who are considered way more liberal than we are, they have much more conservative abortion laws. Some of them, it's after 8 weeks, no, not unless it's a threat of life to the mother or severe defects or, any number of, they're pretty stringent across most of Europe. And I don't know. Anyway, that's what I think. Go ahead.
I totally agree with you. And I think the whole issue here is that I don't know if Alabama's abortion law is actually going to make it to the Supreme Court. I've seen some of again, Twitter's not real life, but I've seen some of the Twitter lawyers kind of say that, and even some pro-life Twitter lawyers say that there's no chance. There's no way this thing makes it before the Supreme Court. There's no way that the Supreme Court votes in the way that they need to even hear this thing, because I believe you need 4 justices to vote in favor of actually hearing an argument before it even comes before the court. And I can only think of one solid justice. Absolutely solid, who would vote to hear this thing, and that would be Clarence Thomas. Right. Neil Gorsuch, probably, but it's not a sure thing. Kavanaugh and Alito, no. I don't think Kavanaugh's going to do it. I think Kavanaugh bases too much of his judicial philosophy off of precedent. So, do you think that there's any chance this thing makes it before the Supreme Court?
Once again, I think it's just part of the play. One of the things with the Alabama legislature they wanted to do was they wanted to put in a rape and incest amendment. And they said, no, we want a clean bill, which was basically, this is what they said. Look, we want a bill that is so extreme that that its constitutionality has to be challenged. They didn't actually say that. I mean, that's reading between the lines on it. When you look at Georgia and you look at Kentucky's bills and Missouri, a lot of them are along those lines too. Yeah, they've let the waters get muddied a bit, but they want a constitutional challenge with it. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you get enough states doing it on both sides of that, then it's going to have to. They're going to have to hear it one way or another.
Yeah, there's so many fair-weathered conservatives, too, that are all of a sudden saying, after this Alabama abortion bill, they're saying, oh, I'm uncomfortable with this whole thing. I don't really know if this is the way that we want to go. And this is the ultimate argument of pro-life, that abortion, except for in the most absolute extreme cases of the life of the mother, ought to be outlawed, ought to be something that doesn't happen. It's not, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, a lot of these abortion bills that we have right now, those are just stepping stones. The ultimate goal should be something along the lines of what Alabama has. And I don't know why, I don't usually say this, right? I don't usually turn on conservatives like this too often, where I go after people for being too weak, because I've often kind of gone after some people on the right for having too harsh of language. But the spineless people that I've seen that, and no offense to them, because some of them are very nice people, but the spinelessness that I've seen from some people going, well, this bill, who are adamantly pro-life, who go, this bill is just too far. It's too far for me. I don't understand it. You see what they're doing in New York. You see what they're trying to do in all of these left-wing states. And you think all of a sudden this Alabama bill is too far? Like Guy Benson called this Alabama bill the opposite equivalent of what they did in New York. No. That's like saying not committing genocide is the opposite equivalent of committing genocide. You don't make that comparison. One side values life, the other side says that it's a clump of cells. Even if you disagree with how far the Alabama bill goes, they should never be equivocated, I should say, to what New York is doing and to what the left is really trying to do on abortion. It makes me so angry to see so many people who are always so adamantly pro-life for the retweets and for the likes coming out and saying, I don't know anymore.
Well, and that's just because they're not seeing, I've already made the point that this is to get a SCOTUS challenge, or this is to get a federal challenge, and so I don't take the Alabama bill seriously. Now, how far should we go as a nation? I mean, yes, abortion is abhorrent, and my views have switched on this. I used to be very pro-choice in my teens and 20s, and then I started to realize, as my thing is science, and as I watched the age of viability go from 25 weeks to 20 weeks in the span of my lifetime, the libertarian in me says, well, then that's murder. Anything after, if the baby can survive, then anything after that date is murder. And as long as science keeps pushing the envelope one way, I think the laws need to move with it, and then you can make the same argument with the internet and a whole lot of things. It's great that government wheels move really goddamn slow, but sometimes they move too slow because they don't want to have that conversation. And this is what these bills are doing. They're forcing this conversation. They're making law reflect science now, in my opinion.
Well, I think,
Yeah.
I think the biggest argument here is there's this growing faction in the pro-life movement, and I'm a part of that part of it, that says that life begins at conception. I think it's really the most viable kind of concrete option that you can go to. And then the other extreme is that, or not the extreme, the other faction in the pro-life movement is that we should look at viability, right? We should look at when life begins at viability, when the baby can actually survive outside the womb. And I don't know. I just don't find that argument extremely convincing, that viability should be where we determine it's a life, because I feel like as viability shifts, let's say right now that viability is at 20 weeks. It's mainly an inconsistency that I find with the argument rather than dismantling the whole argument. But we say that...
I agree that it's not a good argument, because, the point I was making with viability is that having watched viability switch moved me from pro-choice to pro-life. Yeah, the viability argument, it's built on really soft sand because, once again, if you look at science, they are now growing sheep from, conception to the moment that the cell is fertilized, that the egg is fertilized. They're growing them in external wombs. So at that point, viability is the moment that, that basically conception. So I agree with that. Mm-hmm. That, it's like, okay, at this point, we can now say science is able to shelter life outside the womb from the moment the egg is fertilized. So at that point, that makes it alive. That makes it alive. So therefore, anything stopping that outside of natural causes is murder.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I think viability is just too relative of a standard, because if like I said, if you have viability at 20 weeks and then viability moves to 15 weeks, well, before viability officially scientifically moved to 15 weeks, you just aborted a bunch of 15-week-old fetuses, a bunch of 15-week-old babies. So are we admitting that they were lives before science officially moved to that point, or are they only now a life that science has moved to that point? And I don't think it's good to justify what a life is and is not on that pure of an analytical scientific term. I think we do need some sort of, I guess, metaphysical morality in there, whether that's, when I say metaphysical, I don't even strictly mean God. I just mean something that can't purely be conceptualized scientifically. You can't make a solid pro-life argument. I don't even think you can make a solid pro-choice argument, as much as they try to say that they tout science. You can't make a solid argument either way, which when it is and it's not life, without including some of that kind of non-physical, non-analytical morality to it. So I think that when an argument is too relative, like viability is, I just don't think it's something that you can consistently rely on.
No, you can't. And to the point you made is that, and this is, once again, this goes back to what shifted me from choice to life, was that, I had to mentally rationalize to myself, so wait, 3 weeks ago when it was 22 weeks, it's like you said, it's like, does everything that every, baby that was aborted from 20 to 22 weeks, a couple of weeks ago, they weren't alive, but now they are. So that's not, I had to process that within myself that, it's murder. So, it was murder then, but we've just now shifted the law, It's like we say with the gun debate, how do you make, murder more legal? Does the AR-15 make a murder more illegal than, anyway?
I agree. And I don't understand exactly why. Because we're so different from any other country in the sense that this has become a really central cultural debate. And I don't understand why it's such a central cultural debate. I mean, I can understand when you have one side that totally disagrees on the fact that it's a life, and you have another side that says they're protecting the babies. I can understand where you'll have a heated argument there. But I don't think people really understand how tied in pro-choice, pro-life abortion is to our culture. It's really unique, because I've had friends who have European friends, and I've even had one or two European friends say to me, why are you so obsessed? Like, why is America so obsessed with abortion? What is this? We don't have these debates over here. So I don't, why do you think this has become kind of such a central focus of the culture?
Yeah, well, the reason why I think this is a cultural debate in America is, okay, I don't want to paint all leftists under the same brush, but the ones who love socialists, especially the millennials, the Bernie brothers, that love socialism, it's like the tankies back during the Cold War who thought that it was a good idea for Russia to send the tanks in and invade Hungary to suppress the uprisings in Hungary. And what it is they're basically just a death cult. They turn their blind eye to the millions dead under communism and socialism during the, those failed attempts. They turned a blind eye to Venezuela. They turned a blind eye to Cuba, because I really think that they're just, I want to say that I hate to sound this extreme, but I think that they're in a death cult, and abortion is appealing to them because it's part of the, the same population control. We've got too many people, and eugenicists are the progressive. They just, the best way to kill people is to get them before they've even been born. And that's why I think that it's culturally, it appeals to them, maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, I think on a level that, it does.
Well, I've heard that argument from people on the left too, that abortion is a good population control method. So I don't even, that's not even, some people will try and say that you're being too, I guess you could say you're attributing too much motive. And I'm someone who always tries to avoid attributing motive to people. But there is this huge segment of the left. I don't even think it's just a huge segment. I think a majority of the left do sympathize somewhat with the population is growing too big, we need to do something to control it argument. I don't know why it's a specific American thing either. Like I listen, the European left is absolutely batshit insane. So I'm not. I think the American left is still better than they are. But the fact that this is an American left issue centrally, like it's different from anywhere else in the world, I don't know exactly why that is.
Well, I don't see the level of, pro-death from European leftists that, and I really want to, everyone, says, well, why is the United States the policeman of the world? I say, well, you forced us to. You're bi-generational auto-genocide in Europe where you've wipe out entire generations every 40 to 60 years in your continent-wide war that we've put a stop to. And this is why America hasn't had that. Since the Civil War, we have not had to pay for our sins in blood. And, you can look at our contributions to World War II, Vietnam, Korea, desert, Afghanistan, everything else, where we have paid in blood, but not wiped out an entire generation from it. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think Europe, they can kind of appreciate. I mean, they had the plagues, they've had the war. Europe is Europe. That's a good name for it. Europe has Europe is used to large swaths of their population dying out. So they look at something like self-genocide or abortion more seriously than we do, I think. Everything with us is entertainment and just on a, conceptual level, not on a practical level with us.
Well, especially with Germany, where they remind themselves every day that their country committed one of the worst atrocities in human history. So I think there's merit to that argument. I think there's merit to the argument that even with all the radical leftism sprouting in Europe, even with all of the British, we're going to ban all the knives talk
and rusty spoons.
It seems as if I have a veteran friend who's brought this up before, who says that I never want. He was overseas, and he basically said that I never want to do what I did over there again, but I respect kind of violence. I respect it in the sense that that it's something that you don't want to mess with. That it's something that you kind of you give space. That it's something you don't delve into easily. That kind of respect. And I think the issue with our generation, which is a thing that Europe has over us in many senses, is that they don't respect violence. They don't realize how extreme an option violence actually is. And I think it actually transcends not respecting violence to they don't respect violence, and maybe they know what it is. They know what they're doing is violent a little bit because they continually try to justify abortion by saying, well, it's not actually a life. It's not actually a life. It's not actually a life. But I don't know. I think there's also some elements of the left that try to argue it where it's a very empathetic thing. I had someone reply to me the other day, and then he DM'd me, and he was like, I want a civil debate with you. And I was going to respond after I filmed my podcast with Benji the other day, but before I filmed my podcast with Benji, I responded to Kamala Harris with some snarky thing, and he replies to me like, oh, no, never mind. But anyways, he replied to one of my tweets where he was like, do you value the innocence of the girl who has been raped? Are you devaluing the innocence of the girl who's being forced to carry this baby to term? And my whole thing is, you really think that after a girl, and this is awful. I am so sorry for anyone that this has happened to. I think the community should come around people like this. But do you genuinely believe that if a girl is raped and then becomes pregnant, all of a sudden, if she gets an abortion, that negates that loss of innocence or that trauma? I think there's some really misguided empathy also going on in the pro-choice movement. I don't think it's all a death cult. But no, I totally understand where you're coming from. And I agree with the fact that I do think Europeans respect the violence that they inflict more so than people in my generation do.
Well, and one of the problems with the three main arguments on the pro-choice, pro-abortion side is, one, rape and incest. That is so fringe and so, I mean, it's coming from the same people who believe in rape culture and that just being a man, you're a rapist, in that they have fetishized rape and incest to the point where it controls their arguments. So they assume, it's like some of them are so extreme that all sex is rape. So when you have that mindset, then it's easy to say that all pregnancies are a product of rape. And so you can go down that path, but it's such a fringe number. It's in a data set, it would be thrown out as an outlier. The next argument is health of the mother. That's even more rare. My response to this whenever I see that is that Dr. Quinn called and wants her medical problems back. It's again, it is so rare that the health of the mother, or the life of the mother, is a factor in getting an abortion that, again, in a data set, it would be thrown out as an outlier. So, and these are their arguments that they stand behind, that they trumpet. Well, what about these fringe cases? Well, if you want to base law on extreme fringe cases, then you would break the law every time you walked outside your house. So, you can't base law and politics and morality around the extreme fringes of a topic.
And I agree. I do think that there should be, I like that Alabama made an exception in their abortion laws that the life of the mother should be the one exception for abortion. I think a lot of, Missouri is making that one exception in their abortion bill. I do support that because I consider the life of the mother more like game theory. It's not necessarily that I'm saying that the baby inside her is not a life. It's just saying if I have to choose between losing both of them or losing one of them, I would rather lose one of them. Right. So it's not necessarily that I'm devaluing what's the life of the mother, but I'm saying that it's more likely that they're both going to die than, I think that there is argumental consistency in saying that abortion should be limited to standards all but except when the life of the mother is at risk. And pro-choicers, or I should say pro-abortionists, since they're starting to call pro-lifers anti-abortionists, right, as if that makes us sound any worse.
Oh, you're anti-choice. Well, no, because I actually looked in my refrigerator and I chose Coke over Pepsi. So no, I'm not against choice.
It's they're trying to, because I know pro-lifers have kind of started calling pro-choicers for a little while now. They've started calling them pro-abortion people instead of just pro-choice. And all of a sudden, pro-choicers are saying we're anti-abortionists. It's like, that doesn't make us sound worse.
Yeah.
What we call you make you sound worse.
Right, yeah. And yeah, no, it's, again, these are Twitter not being real life, that, these are all terms that we've just had to ramp up and ratchet up in order to, be heard above the din.
Yeah.
So
I think abortion too, before we kind of move on, I think abortion too is one of those debates where it's so heated. And again, on this, I've said this probably 2 times now, right? I am very against unnecessarily attributing motive to people, because I think when you unnecessarily attribute motive to people and you call the person themselves, not the idea that they promote, but the person themselves, evil, then you have no option but to label that person as an enemy. It's why I overall avoid the death cult talk. It's why I overall avoid calling left-wing people necessarily, most mainstream left-wing people who are just civilians in the leftist movement. It's why I refrain from calling them evil. Obviously Louis Farrakhan, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, those people are bad people. But I refrain from calling fellow Americans that as much as possible, because I think when you start calling every single fellow American who disagrees with you on even the most extreme issues evil and attributing motive to them, it really brings this country down the shitter, and it really makes it so we can't be a country anymore. And I never want that. But I think abortion is one of those debates where, honestly, mainly from the pro-choice side, but pro-lifers do it too, where motive is the most attributed, where if you disagree with someone, pro-choicers have been doing this on Twitter, and it's really disgusting. I know a lot of my friends have gotten these messages. They've been getting messages that they hope their wives, their girlfriends, or they get raped. They get these messages that they hope that their children get raped. They get these messages that they hope they die. Right? These are the instances where if you go out of your way and text someone, not disagree with them, but you actually go out of your way to DM them on social media or otherwise, that you hope they get raped or you hope they die. That's evil. I will attribute the motive to you that you're evil. And I think too many people, though, we're letting this debate go too far, basically, I think.
Well, again, look, most of the people on the left and on the right, they're just normal people. They go through their days. They just want to pay their bills, enjoy their family, just be left alone, more or less. And Twitter doesn't allow for that. That's what, Twitter is the battleground. While I say it's not real life, I also think that it is the battleground for America's conscience, because that is where you have the fighters. You have a lot of people who are just on food Twitter doing food things. And yeah, that's me too. And cargo short, but but in political Twitter, it doesn't allow for that. Every hill is a hill you have to be willing to die on. So, and I think that I don't want to say that it doesn't help the discourse of America, but it really exposes, it's done a good job of pulling the mask off of a lot of people. The argument of, the whole thing behind Roe and everything we heard through up until the late 90s was safe, legal, and rare. That's what, we want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. I will concede that to you, but now it is on demand for convenience. And that's when the mask fell off. That's when the battle lines got drawn.
No, and I agree with you 100%. By the way, I'm not trying to be spineless and saying the debate's going too far and that pro-lifers are going too far with these bills or with their rhetoric. I'm saying more so the debate's gone too far in the sense that I think too many people are trying to call each other evil. And I talked about this with Brady Leonard on the podcast before, that just because someone has an evil idea doesn't necessarily make them evil to their core. But now it's getting to the point where I do think more and more people, I mean, when you send a rape threat to someone, I think you're pretty evil.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of the has to do with just the level of misinformation that people receive. And, that goes on, not even both sides, all sides, but the level of misinformation where it's not a baby, it's a fetus. It's they're anti-choice. And that's where, this narrative, I mean, you watch narratives form in real time, especially on Twitter, but you watch the narrative form in real time now to where, like you said, the person may not necessarily be evil unless they are the one DMing the, death threat and rape threat and everything, but they have been conditioned to believe X person because they agree with X person. So they have become a member of X person's tribe. And when that person says the conservatives are evil because they want to bring Handmaid's Tale into real life. It's just, it's like, well, okay, that's fine. Where do I get my broodmares? So yeah, it's made conversation harder and easier because you can immediately tell a person just by who they retweet. You can kind of tell where they're going to fall into an argument 90% of the time.
No, I do agree with that. It's just, I don't know, man. Twitter's too toxic sometimes. But moving on from this whole abortion Twitter debate, there's been some talk within, honestly, the pro-life community that I've seen after this whole debacle with Alabama's abortion bill. And there's been this debate that if we could, this will never happen, by the way. I want to preface this with saying I'm not an idealist. Okay, I know this will never happen, but it's more of, I guess, a hypothetical philosophical argument where people say, let's say we could get a trade on abortion. We could have the strictness of Georgia and Missouri and Ohio's abortion bills if we were to trade the libs free birth control, government-sponsored, government-paid birth control. What do you think about that? Do you think that would be a valid trade? Would you conduct that, or do you think no? Well, I'm not willing to cede any ground on that.
Nothing is free. Okay, yeah. I mean, first of all, it's being paid for by the taxpayer.
Of course.
So here, no, I'm against it. I'm against the government providing most of anything. You know, my belief is that government should be small enough that you can drown it in the bathtub if necessary. So giving something free, then the hand goes out with, well, you know, you gave me free birth control. Why don't you give me a free car? You know, that kind of thing. So what I would like to do, and I've seen this bill has come up a few times, is that to make birth control OTC, you know, make it over the counter, because then it's competitive, and then there's no argument for it. And the reason why the Democrats keep shooting this down, because it's the Republicans who keep bringing it up. The reason why the Democrats keep shooting it down is because once you were to do that, then you have taken Planned Parenthood's argument of they provide birth control away from them. Because if you can go down to CVS, Walgreens, and pick up a month's supply of birth control for $8. I mean, you look at the other OTC medicines. You got Claritin, Benadryl, and 100 other allergy medications, or 100 different pain Tylenol, aspirin, so on and so forth. You do that with birth control, then you have taken the one argument, the one thing that they have for, and that's Planned Parenthood, that they say Planned Parenthood provides.
That's a good point. I never even thought of it that way. I know there are some people who try to say that, oh, we shouldn't make it OTC. I think, what's her name? Kimberly something argued this because it's a hormonal drug and it should be something that a doctor monitors. But Tiana Lowe, I think she wrote a piece on this, and I know she's posted links to studies on this, that actually people who kind of self-check and self-reflect on birth control do an adequate job at it, despite the fact that it's a hormonal medicine. So I think we should be totally willing to treat people like adults and make this an over-the-counter drug. Well, also, beyond that, people will argue like, oh, people can't afford birth control, whether it's a birth control pill or it's condoms, which is even more ridiculous. But I don't find that a convincing argument. In a country where the poorest of the poor can afford an iPhone or an Android, you're telling me they can't afford a $20 pill. That's ridiculous.
And that's, it's setting the bar of low expectations upon a class of people that they do not represent. It's the same people who say voter ID is racist because, inner city, they're too poor to get to the DMV. Well, if they're too poor to get to the DMV, then they're too poor to get to the voting precinct. The arguments don't stand. And that's, I get the hormonal thing, but you can overdose on aspirin. Mm-hmm. You can overdose on Robitussin. All these things are over the counter. I mean, thank you, meth producers, for making where I have to show my ID to get Sudafed. But at least, that's the same thing. It's like, okay, fine. Make it to where, well, we don't want 10-year-old girls taking the pill. Okay, great. I've got to get checked for ID when I buy alcohol. I got to get checked, get them to go get, have their doctor, even then, you can visit a doctor who can say, okay, well, I want you to use this family of birth control products. It's the same thing. It's like are you allergic to penicillin? Well, let's give you amoxicillin. It's the same thing. It's like, with a doctor's advice, take this OTC.
Yeah.
So I don't see yes, I get the inherent dangers of making it OTC, but I don't think anybody is going to overdose on the birth control pill.
Well, beyond that, I've also seen some, well, definitely not, but I've also seen some arguments. One of my friends actually made this argument to me today. I'm not going to say her name, but if she's listening, love you, but you're wrong. But she texted me and she was like, well, I'm starting to rethink my position on government-funded birth control, just because she now understands and sees really how much government spends on frivolous programs and how much government spends on all of this dumb crap. And she's like, well, this, funding birth control on a state level would just be a drop in the bucket. So why don't we just do it? And my whole thing to that is I don't really think that's healthy, that encourages a culture of frivolous spending when you just see every single expense. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, unless you're talking about military funding, right? In the grand scheme of things, just about everything the government funds is a drop in the bucket. I don't think that's a good mentality to go into, because in that case, or to go into funding things with, because in that case, every single frivolous thing that you look at, just because it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, enough drops in the bucket fill the bucket. And that's that's the same thing. Is well, the $500,000 that the government spent on grants to research why lesbians are overweight, that's a drop in the bucket. But still, that is ridiculous spending. Putting shrimp on treadmills. Rand Paul does a thread on Twitter every year on what government wasted your money on. And yeah, they put shrimp on treadmills. I can't remember what they were researching, but they made little treadmills for shrimp to walk on. I don't know if it was what they were researching, but it's become a meme. And so, but yeah, Rand Paul does a list of the stupid shit your government spends money on every year. And he does it at the end of the year, for his Festivus tweet thread. But, and you're right. The government spends too much on everything. It's back in the 80s, there was a big scandal about how defense contractors were billing the government like $300 for a hammer. So it's kind of like, that's what, and they'd get these defense contracts to build, the B-1B bomber. And then when you look at the itemized bill, $300 for a hammer. It's like when you go to the hospital and you look at your itemized bill and they charge you $20 for an aspirin.
That's ridiculous. That would make me, I don't know how people are okay with that. Like, I don't know how bureaucrats are okay with that. I have to think it's because it's not their money.
Exactly. Well, no, because bureaucrats don't care, because they get to sit there. It's a lifetime unelected position. Mm-hmm. So as long as there's very little. The bureaucracy is probably the worst part of the government. Everybody blames Congress and everything, but it's the bureaucracy that is really the chain around our necks. And but yeah, it's. Government funded anything is a bad idea, because they had to take it from somebody. And it's like, well, you're paying a fraction of a penny out of your paycheck for, to provide everybody in the nation with free birth control. Well, we're one of the richest nations on the planet. If you can't afford an $8 prescription a month, you need to relook at your life. What are you going to do when you have a real health problem and your insurance doesn't cover the $200 a month pill or the $80 a month pill if you can't afford anyway?
Universal health care, bad.
Oh God, they're trying to
do. It's and you know what? You're a, how do you pronounce it? See, I have this thing on this podcast. Minarchist. Okay, Minarchist. You saved me. Yeah. I have this really bad tendency on this podcast to just mispronounce names and to mispronounce everything. So thank you for saving me from that embarrassment.
Sure, no problem.
I can see, isn't that like a form of libertarianism?
It's in that house. Minarchy is basically the main role of government is defense, trade, law enforcement, and judges. That's it. Anything beyond that is not within the scope of government. If you want to look at pure minarchy, you look at the Articles of Confederation before the Constitution. When we first founded as a country, that was minarchy. We understand that doesn't work. We're pragmatic enough to say, okay, you need to have a little bit more in that. You can't just go full ANCAP. You have to have a little bit of control over the 50 children that are your states. So that's... but it's basically the smallest government as you could possibly have and still function as a government.
Interesting. What do you say? So an issue, would you consider yourself personally, if someone were to say, what is your broader philosophy? Would you say that you're a conservative or a libertarian or conservatarian?
More conservatarian. A lot of it, looking at it as on a government level, it's none of the government's business. Government shouldn't be involved in marriage. Government shouldn't be involved in, taxation is theft. And on the whole, there should be very little government. As on a personal level, as long as it doesn't rob my pocket or break my legs, I don't care. Mm-hmm. It's like if you're gay and you want to be married, doesn't affect me one bit. Now, when you get into non-consensual relationships, or you get into where, that's, I draw the line at, pedophilia or pedophilia. It's like, that's you're messing with somebody who doesn't know any better. But yeah, as far as anything else, I just don't care enough in my life because it doesn't affect me.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I don't really see much of an issue with that. It's more so that my biggest issue with libertarian, and this isn't you, it's just my biggest issue with libertarians as a whole. And my friend Mark has brought this up, is that, and it's why he doesn't classify himself as a libertarian, even though he probably identifies with them most, but of any broader philosophy. The issue with them is they seem to have this, not distrust, because distrust of a government institution is good. I think everyone should have a little bit of natural distrust of government. That's how you keep a government healthy. That's how you hold them accountable. But they go past having this distrust of a broader government institution to thinking that naturally, a government institution like a federal government is corrupt, is just unusable, is something that will never work in your best interest, is something that at the end of the day not only is corrupt, but if it's not corrupt now, it'll eventually go corrupt. It'll always be corrupt, always. So why even have one to begin with? There's this natural distrust in the libertarian movement, from what I've seen.
That's the ANCAP, ANSOC level. That's the anarcho-capitalist and anarcho-socialist. That's the the anarchist part of libertarianism, where libertarian as a whole, the big L libertarian as a party, they have actually been co-opted by the ANSOCs, the anarcho-socialists, to where you can see it in everything they do, is that they are even more hard left than the Dems on most issues. The Libertarian Party tweeted out last year, it was the year before, that North Korea is freer than the United States because of their marijuana.
Oh, I saw that.
So that's where you just have, a whole level that most right-leaning libertarian conservatarians just cringe and do not associate with the Libertarian Party unless they absolutely have to. So you got to kind of look at it as big L, small L libertarianism.
Yeah. Well, even small L libertarianism, from what I've seen, I mean, just the broader philosophy of libertarianism, if it's not been co-opted yet, I've just seen it begun to be co-opted by, or at least the loudest voices of the movement have kind of had this outlook that government, not just you shouldn't have a distrust of government, but government wholesale cannot be trusted. And it's something that it makes your philosophy moot. The government is there at a base level. The government is there to protect your natural rights. The government is, you form a government, you come together, and you sacrifice some natural freedoms as a people so that the government broadly can protect your natural rights. So, but if you have no trust of government whatsoever, if you don't trust that the government is there at all to protect your natural rights and never can be, then, I mean, your philosophy is moot, because a state of nature is a very pure form of living. But also a state of Locke, Hobbes, every single natural rights philosophist admits this, that a state of nature, even though it's a pure form of living, at least Locke does, Hobbes seems to have some disdain for the state of nature, even though it's a pure form of living, it's very easily corruptible. It's very, very, very fast to turn on its head. It essentially takes one bad apple to spoil the bunch, essentially. So
yeah, I lean more towards Locke than Hobbes on that, in that and I've had this conversation with voluntarists and all the extreme ends of anarchists, in that as a whole, you can debate the origin of man, but as a species, we are a pack animal. We're predators. We have binocular hearing, binocular vision, stereo hearing, and nice sharp teeth. We are designed to prey, whether that means physically hunting for our food or metaphysically preying on those weaker. We are predisposed to do that. So to say that, man is so enlightened that we can live without government is a lie. It just doesn't. You have to change the hearts and minds of 7 billion people to come around to your thinking. And that's the same problem with socialism and communism too, is that human nature wins out, in that, people will prey on those weaker than them or exploit them in some way. So, it doesn't work. And that's what, you have those arms of libertarianism that are very frustrating, because it's the same thing where you have the extremes on the left and the extremes on the right, the socialists, the communists, and the fascists, that it doesn't work. I mean, they're co-opting all of the voices, to where the left seems completely unhinged, and to the left, the right seems completely unhinged, because the far reaches of it are getting amplified now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's a really good way to put it. I don't know. I have very little faith in. But by the way, this is not an attack on you. This isn't an attack on right-leaning libertarians. But I just have very little faith in the broader libertarian movement at this point, because I see that, just like the state of nature, they're very easily turned on their head, the libertarian movement as a whole. And I think that if the libertarian movement could kind of get some organization and get around the ideas and the principles that a lot of Americans actually agree on, like leave me the hell alone, like they could focus on that and make that their primary messaging point, instead of going to random boomers on Twitter and saying, hey, yeah, heroin, pretty good stuff. I think they could really make some progress, but as of right now, I just think they're too idealistic for your own good, which means you can have your ideals, but at the same time, when you're going to someone who agrees with you on half of what you believe, and then on the other half they think you're way too extreme, you don't go to them, but the other half that they think is way too extreme right off the bat. I think that's what a lot of the libertarians tend to do.
Yeah, and okay, here the libertarian movement, and we'll even go Big L party in this, in that where they screwed up, both in the election and as a group, in that you had Austin Peterson, who was a nominee for president of the Libertarian Party. So what happened was, as Trump started to rise and started to knock off all the good conservatives, in the 2016 election, everybody started to shift and started looking at Austin Peterson, because he's very libertarian conservative. So the Libertarian Party decided they did not want to have all of these homeless conservatives co-opting their message, because they had the caricature of what conservatives were. So they went with Gary Johnson, which immediately turned off everybody. And then they got gun grabber Bill Weld as their VP nominee. So, and in that, the Libertarian Party and libertarianism made its stance in that it is not interested in conservative values. So, that's where they've lost their. I mean, they've always been a one platform party anyway. They started out as being anti-Vietnam War, and then after the Vietnam War, they just went legalize pot everywhere. So that's really, they've always just been a one tone party. So, but and as the party itself, but libertarianism as itself, I see a lot more libertarianism in conservatives than I do in actual libertarians now,
which is pretty sad if you think about it.
Yeah. So I mean, heroin, ain't it great? No, that's again, that's one of the extreme voice, but that's what it's still. Goddamn, McAfee and those other guys that they put up too. Just why, dude strips down to his underwear at the just guys, you're not helping your case.
Didn't he murder a girl or something?
Oh, McAfee? Allegedly, he murdered his neighbor down in Belize, and that's why he's wanted in Belize. But listening to him and listening to Belize, while great, is kind of it's what you would expect from a third world country with a police force. So it's I don't have a horse in that race, but. He went out to sea, and I guess he got picked up by federal prosecutors the other day. It hasn't been confirmed, but it's believed that he was arrested by by the feds this week.
Just recently?
Within the last couple days.
Oh man, I was hoping the yacht tweets would continue.
I know, right? No, McAfee's an odd bird. I like him on the same way I liked Hunter S. Thompson. You're a nut. I'd love to hang out with you, but I'm keeping you at arm's length because there's absolutely nothing in the world. It would not surprise me to be sitting there having a beer with him, then all of a sudden have his gun to my head. So
that sounds totally McAfee. I mean,
yeah, right.
I don't know, man. That dude just creeps me out. I wouldn't even have a beer with him. He'd probably spike it with like ecstasy or something.
Well, yeah.
But all that being said, sadly, Orty, we've run out of time here, and I hate it because we've actually had a good conversation despite the technical difficulties, which I think we've covered up quite well. But where can people hear more from you if they want to hear more from you? And are there any projects that you're working on right now that you want people to know about?
Well, yeah, you can follow me as at Orty Packard on Twitter. Every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on KLRN Radio, I co-host FooBar with Politibunny. And that's pretty much it right now. I'm just, I'm working on the KLRN website slowly, but we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, no, that's it. That's the only place where people can find me.
Wow, Orty. Okay. I thought you'd have like 1,000 social media pages. No, just kidding.
No, I'm on Minds and I'm on Intellectual Dark Web, but I haven't really used those in a while. I usually just go to those when I get suspended from my frequent and sundry suspensions from Twitter.
How's that going, by the way? Have you I know you were suspended a while ago.
I'm never getting Road Beer back. I'm never getting that account back. I have tried and tried and tried for a year. I've tried. I mean, I'm on my 7th account that's gotten decent sized. So, but yeah, every time I pop my head up, I get knocked back down.
You're like, what's his name? Mujahideen?
Mujahideen, Gay Patriot, and Chris McAllister both got suspended yesterday. Along with either Twitter is completely inept at writing algorithms and software, or they are actually going after conservative accounts. I believe it's more of the latter than the former. But even then, I'm small. If they were going after real conservative accounts, they would be going after the high follow blue checks. So, but on the other hand, I don't know, I still get 2 to 3 million, impressions a month. So I must be doing something right.
Good job, Orty. All right. I don't want to make this run any longer. Guys, make sure to go listen to FooBar, because it is a good show. I don't usually have people on the program unless I've listened to their stuff if they have a podcast or a radio show. And Orty and Foo are actually really good at what they do. Their show is very entertaining to listen to, and I encourage you all to go give KLRN a visit. And with that being said, Orty, thank you so much again for coming on. With all of that being said, guys, I'll see you this Friday. I think we're having Jason Rantz on this Friday, so that should be fun. I've never actually talked to him before, so let's see how that goes. And until then, have a good week, guys.